Imagine being married to a millionaire, living in a sprawling mansion and expecting your first child. Now imagine your husband, Cole Whitaker, the man who promised you forever, trying to throw you out on the street, pregnant and alone. This isn't just a story, it's a nightmare that became Ava Whitaker's reality. But in her darkest hour, an unexpected hand reached out, not with pity, but with power. The hand of her mother-in-law, Evelyn Whitaker, holding the keys to the very mansion her son tried to take. This is a story of betrayal, hidden motives, and the fierce, unbreakable bond of motherhood. The first thing Ava Whitaker noticed about the house on Starling Crest was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, the kind that settles over a home filled with love and contentment. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that swallows sound and leaves a ringing in your ears. The mansion, a sprawling edifice of glass and white stone, was perched atop a hill overlooking the glittering expanse of the city, a sentinel of wealth and power. From the outside, it was a dream, a testament to the success of her husband, Cole Whitaker. On the inside, it was a gilded cage. Ava Whitaker had been Mrs. Cole Whitaker for 2 years, a whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet and into a life of unimaginable luxury. She had met him at a charity gala, a shy, unassuming artist captivated by his charm and ambition. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that she had mistaken for passion, showering her with gifts and promises of a future that shimmered with possibility. He was the golden boy of the tech world, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. She was the quiet, introspective artist who saw the world in shades of color and emotion, a stark contrast to his world of black and white, profit and loss. Their life together was a carefully curated performance, a series of public appearances and lavish parties where they played the role of the perfect couple. Ava Whitaker had tried to make the mansion a home, filling it with her vibrant paintings and the scent of fresh flowers. But the house resisted her efforts. Its cold, modern aesthetic, a constant reminder of its true owner. Every piece of furniture, every work of art had been chosen by Cole, a reflection of his taste, his status, his control. Her own contributions felt like small acts of rebellion, splashes of color in a monochromatic world. The power imbalance in their relationship had been subtle at first, a gentle current beneath the surface of their idyllic life. It was in the way he dismissed her opinions on everything from the decor to their social calendar, the way he made all the decisions, big and small, without consulting her. He called it taking care of her. But Ava Whitaker was beginning to feel less cared for and more managed. Her art, once the center of her world, had been relegated to a hobby, a quaint pastime that he tolerated with a patronizing smile. "It's a wonderful creative outlet for you, darling," he would say, his words a subtle dismissal of her talent and ambition. The loneliness was a constant ache in her chest, a hollow space that even the most extravagant gifts couldn't fill. She had left her small circle of friends and family behind to move to the city with Cole, and he had made no effort to help her build a new life. His world was a closed loop of business associates and fair-weather friends, people who orbited him like satellites, drawn to the gravitational pull of his wealth. Ava Whitaker was an outsider, a decorative accessory on his arm, and she had never felt more alone. One evening, as she stood on the terrace overlooking the city lights, a familiar wave of melancholy washed over her. The view, once a source of wonder and inspiration, now felt like a taunt, a reminder of the vibrant, bustling world that was just beyond her reach. She was a prisoner in her own home, a beautiful bird in a gilded cage, and the bars were closing in. She heard the sound of his car on the gravel driveway and braced herself for his arrival. He would walk in, kiss her on the cheek, and ask her about her day with a detached air of politeness, his mind already on the next business deal, the next conquest. The man she had fallen in love with, the charming, attentive suitor who had wooed her with poetry and promises, was gone, replaced by a stranger who wore his face. As he entered the living room, his eyes swept over her, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "You look tired, Ava," he said, his voice smooth as silk, yet with an undercurrent of something sharp and cold. "Have you been painting all day? You should rest. You know how I worry about you." She forced a smile, the familiar mask of contentment slipping into place. "I'm fine, Cole. Just enjoying the view." He walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink, his back to her. "I have some news," he said, his tone casual, but with an edge that made her heart skip a beat. "I'm thinking of selling the house." Ava Whittaker's breath caught in her throat. "Selling the house? But why? I thought you loved it here." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "It's time for a change, a new chapter. I'm looking at a penthouse in the city, closer to the office. More practical." The word hung in the air between them, a cold, hard stone. Practical, as if their life together, their home, was nothing more than a business transaction, a line item on a balance sheet. The house, for all its coldness, was the only home she had known for the past 2 years, and the thought of leaving it, of being uprooted once again, filled her with a sense of dread. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What about my studio? My art?" He waved a dismissive hand. "We'll find you a new studio, darling. Something smaller, more manageable. You can't possibly need all this space." And there it was again, the subtle, insidious way he diminished her, her passion, her very being. She was not a partner in his life. She was an accessory, an asset to be managed and controlled. The gilded cage was shrinking, and for the first time, Ava Whittaker felt a flicker of fear. The silence of the house was no longer just oppressive. It was menacing. It was the sound of her own voice being silenced, her own dreams being erased. And in that moment, she knew that she had to find a way to break free, before the silence consumed her completely. The days that followed Cole's announcement were filled with a tense, unspoken anxiety. He moved through the house with a restless energy, his phone permanently attached to his ear, barking orders at a team of real estate agents and designers. The penthouse he had chosen was a sleek, minimalist space in the heart of the financial district, a monument to his ambition and a stark contrast to the sprawling, art-filled home Ava Whittaker had tried to create. He showed her the blueprints with a triumphant gleam in his eye, as if expecting her to share his enthusiasm. She had feigned a smile, her heart sinking with each perfectly rendered image of cold, sterile rooms. The cracks in their perfect facade were beginning to show, hairline fractures that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed image of their marriage. Cole's controlling nature, once masked by a veneer of solicitous concern, was now on full display. He criticized her choice of clothes, her taste in music, even the way she arranged the flowers in the vase. "It's for your own good, darling," he would say, his voice laced with a condescending sweetness that made her skin crawl. "I just want you to be the best version of yourself." But his version of her was a pale, insipid creature, a reflection of his own desires, with no thoughts or feelings of her own. His mother, Evelyn Whittaker, was a frequent visitor during this time, her presence a silent, watchful counterpoint to Cole's restless energy. Evelyn was a woman of quiet strength and formidable intelligence, with a sharp, discerning gaze that seemed to see right through the carefully constructed artifice of their lives. She was the one who had insisted on Ava Whittaker signing a prenuptial agreement, a move that had initially stung Ava, but one that she was beginning to see as a blessing in disguise. Evelyn was a complex woman, her love for her son warring with her clear-eyed assessment of his flaws. She treated Ava Whittaker with a cool, reserved politeness, but there were moments, fleeting and unexpected, when Ava would catch a flicker of something else in her eyes, a hint of sympathy, a glimmer of understanding. One afternoon, as Ava Whittaker was working in her studio, a sun-drenched room that was her only sanctuary in the house, Evelyn appeared at the door. She stood there for a moment, her eyes taking in the vibrant chaos of the room, the canvases leaning against the walls, the splatters of paint on the floor, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil hanging in the air. "This is where you disappear to," she said, her voice a soft, melodic murmur. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Ava Whittaker, startled by her presence, put down her brush. "Evelyn, I didn't hear you come in." "I'm not surprised," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You seem to be in another world." She walked into the room, her movements graceful and deliberate, and stopped in front of a large canvas, a swirling abstract of blues and greens that was Ava's latest work. "This is powerful," she said, her voice filled with a genuine admiration that took Ava by surprise. "Thank you," Ava Whittaker said, a blush rising to her cheeks. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her art with such sincerity, and it felt like a balm to her wounded spirit. Evelyn turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "Cole tells me you're moving," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Ava Whittaker nodded, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Yes, to a penthouse in the city." "And are you happy about that?" Evelyn asked, her gaze steady and unwavering. The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Ava Whittaker hesitated, her first instinct to retreat behind the familiar mask of contentment. But there was something in Evelyn's eyes, a quiet strength that gave her courage. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I'm not." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Evelyn's expression softened, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. "I didn't think so," she said, her voice gentle. "This house, it's too much for him. He's always been a man who needs to be in control, and this place, it has a life of its own." She looked around the studio, her gaze lingering on the vibrant canvases. "You've made it a home, Ava. Something he could never do." The words were a revelation, a key that unlocked a door in Ava Whittaker's mind. She had always seen the house as Cole's, a symbol of his power and control. But Evelyn was right. She had breathed life into its cold, empty rooms, filled them with her own spirit, her own art. And that was what he couldn't stand. It was a part of her that he couldn't control, a world that he couldn't enter. "He wants to sell my paintings," Ava Whittaker confessed, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. "He says they're not suitable for the new place." Evelyn's eyes hardened, a flash of anger in their depths. "He will do no such thing," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "They are your paintings, Ava. They are a part of you, and no one, not even my son, has the right to take that away from you." In that moment, Ava Whittaker saw a different side of Evelyn, a fierce, protective lioness who would stop at nothing to defend what was right. She was not just Cole's mother. She was a woman of principle, a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time since she had entered the gilded cage, Ava felt a glimmer of hope. She was not alone. She had an ally, an unexpected and powerful one, in the one person she had least expected. The cracks in the facade were widening, and through them, A sliver of light was beginning to shine through. The silence of the house was still there, but it was no longer menacing. It was waiting for the storm to break. The storm broke on a Tuesday, a day that had started with a deceptive calm. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Cole had left early for a meeting, his mood unusually buoyant, a strange, almost manic energy radiating from him. Ava Whittaker had spent the morning in her studio, the conversation with Evelyn replaying in her mind, a source of both comfort and trepidation. She had felt a shift in the atmosphere of the house, a subtle change in the currents of power. She was no longer a passive observer in her own life. She was a player in a game she was only just beginning to understand. The first sign that something was amiss was a wave of nausea that washed over her as she was mixing a new shade of blue. She had dismissed it as a side effect of the turpentine, but the feeling persisted, a dull, persistent ache in the pit of her stomach. She had been feeling tired and out of sorts for weeks, a general malaise that she had attributed to the stress of the impending move. But as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her face pale and drawn, a different possibility began to dawn on her, a thought so terrifying and so exhilarating that it made her heart pound in her chest. She had driven to the pharmacy in a daze, her hands trembling as she purchased the small, white box that held the answer to the question that was consuming her. Back in the sterile, impersonal bathroom of the mansion, she had followed the instructions with a sense of unreality, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The 2 pink lines that appeared on the small plastic stick were a confirmation of her deepest fears and her most secret hopes. She was pregnant. A wave of joy, pure and unadulterated, washed over her, so powerful that it brought tears to her eyes. A baby? A life? A part of her that was separate from Cole, from the gilded cage, from the suffocating weight of his control. It was a secret garden that she could nurture, a world of her own that he could never touch, but the joy was quickly followed by a cold, creeping dread. How would Cole react? The man who saw everything in terms of profit and loss, who viewed her art as a quaint hobby. How would he see a child? As another asset to be managed, another possession to be controlled? She had decided to tell him that evening, over a quiet dinner at home. She had set the table with their best china and silverware, a small bouquet of her favorite flowers in the center. She had wanted to create an atmosphere of intimacy, of shared joy, a fragile bubble of hope in the cold, sterile environment of the mansion. But the moment he walked in, she knew that she had been naive. He was in a foul mood, his face a thunderous mask of anger. He had lost a major deal, a setback that had bruised his fragile ego. He paced the living room like a caged animal, his voice a low, guttural growl as he recounted the details of his failure. Ava Whittaker's carefully constructed bubble of hope burst, leaving her with a sense of foreboding. She had waited until he had finished his tirade, his anger subsiding into a sullen silence. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and said the words that would change everything. "Cole, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was more deafening than his anger. He stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a cold, calculating fury that chilled her to the bone. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word a venomous hiss. "You're pregnant?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "I just found out today." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "And you expect me to be happy about this? A child? Now? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is?" The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. "Inconvenient? she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Cole, this is our child." "No," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "It's your child. Your problem. I have a company to run, an empire to build. I don't have time for a screaming brat and a wife who's more interested in playing with paint than in supporting her husband." The veil had been lifted. The last vestiges of the charming, attentive man she had fallen in love with stripped away to reveal the cold, ruthless monster that lay beneath. He saw the child not as a blessing, but as a liability, a threat to his carefully constructed world of power and control. And in that moment, Ava Whittaker understood the true nature of her gilded cage. It was not just a prison of luxury. It was a prison of the soul. "I won't let you do this, Cole," she said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a primal, protective instinct she didn't know she possessed. "This is my child, and I will protect it, with or without you." He sneered at her, his face a mask of contempt. "You have nothing, Ava. You are nothing without me. You signed a prenuptial agreement, remember? You walk away from this marriage with nothing. Not a penny." The threat hung in the air between them, a declaration of war. But he had underestimated her. He had seen her as a weak, pliable creature, a beautiful object to be possessed. He had not seen the fire in her spirit, the strength in her heart, and he had not counted on the one person who held the true power in the Whittaker family, the one person who had seen the cracks in the facade long before they had begun to show, the one person who was about to change the rules of the game. The days that followed the unveiling were a blur of cold, silent warfare. Cole treated Ava Whittaker with a chilling indifference, his presence in the house a constant, oppressive weight. He had moved into one of the guest rooms, a symbolic act of separation that was more cutting than any angry words. He came and went as he pleased, his life a whirlwind of business meetings and late-night calls, leaving Ava to navigate the suffocating silence of the mansion alone. The gilded cage had become a battleground, and she was a soldier with no weapons, no allies, and no way out. He had started a campaign of psychological warfare, a series of small, calculated cruelties designed to break her spirit. He had the locks on her studio changed, cutting her off from the one place where she could find solace and escape. He had cancelled her credit cards, leaving her with no access to money, no means of independence. He had even instructed the staff to ignore her, to treat her as if she were invisible. She was a ghost in her own home, a prisoner in a war she hadn't started and couldn't win. The ultimatum came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, a week after she had told him about the pregnancy. He had summoned her to his study, a room that was the heart of his empire, a space filled with the cold, hard lines of modern furniture and the latest technology. He was sitting behind a large, imposing desk, his face a mask of cold, implacable authority. He did not ask her to sit. "I've had my lawyers draw up the divorce papers," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He pushed a thick manila envelope across the polished surface of the desk. "It's a generous offer, under the circumstances. I'm prepared to give you a one-time settlement, enough to get you back on your feet. On one condition." Ava Whittaker's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic bird beating against the bars of a cage. She knew what was coming, but the reality of it was still a shock, a cold, hard blow to her gut. "You will terminate the pregnancy," he said, his voice as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass. "You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear from my life. Forever." The words hung in the air between them, a monstrous, obscene proposition. He was asking her to trade her child for her freedom, to sacrifice a life for a pittance. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it took her breath away. "No," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I will not. He sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Ava, don't be a fool. You have no choice. You are pregnant, unemployed, and penniless. What kind of life can you offer a child? I am offering you a way out, a chance to start over." "You are offering me blood money," she said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a righteous fury. "You are asking me to kill my own child. And for what? So you can continue to build your precious empire, unencumbered by the inconvenience of a family." A flicker of anger in his eyes, a crack in his carefully controlled facade. "This is not a negotiation, Ava. This is an ultimatum. You have 24 hours to sign the papers. If you refuse, I will evict you from this house. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back, and I will fight you for custody of the child. I will use every resource at my disposal to prove that you are an unfit mother, and I will win. I always win." The threat was a chilling promise, a glimpse into the dark, twisted depths of his soul. He was a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, a man who would destroy her and their child without a second thought. The fear that had been a constant companion for the past few weeks was now a raging torrent, threatening to consume her. She stumbled out of the study in a daze, the manila envelope clutched in her hand like a death sentence. The house, once a symbol of her dreams, was now a prison, and the walls were closing in. She had 24 hours to make an impossible choice, to decide the fate of her child and her own. She wandered through the silent, empty rooms, her mind a whirlwind of despair. She had no one to turn to, no one to help her. Her family was 1,000 miles away, and her friends had been pushed out of her life by Cole's jealousy and control. She was alone, trapped, and utterly defeated. She ended up in her studio, standing in front of the locked door, a symbol of her confinement. She leaned her forehead against the cool, smooth wood, a sob escaping her lips. It was over. He had won, and then she heard a voice behind her, a voice that was calm, steady, and filled with a quiet authority. "He will not win, Ava." She turned, her eyes blurred with tears, to see Evelyn standing in the hallway, her face a mask of grim determination. She was holding a set of keys in her hand. "I have been listening," Evelyn said, her voice low and firm. "I have been watching, and I will not stand by and let him do this to you." She walked towards Ava, her movements filled with a grace and power that seemed to fill the empty hallway. She stopped in front of her, her eyes meeting Ava's with a look of fierce, unwavering support. "This house," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that sent a shiver down Ava's spine, "does not belong to him. It belongs to the Whittaker family. And you, Ava, are a part of that family now. You and your child." She pressed the keys into Ava's hand, her fingers closing around them with a gentle, reassuring pressure. "These are the master keys to the house. He cannot change the locks. He cannot throw you out. You are safe here." The weight of the keys in her hand was a tangible symbol of hope, a lifeline in a sea of despair. Ava Whittaker looked at Evelyn, her heart filled with a gratitude so profound that it left her speechless. She was not alone. She had an ally, a protector, a mother. The ultimatum had been delivered, but the war was far from over. And in the gilded cage on Starling Crest, a new alliance had been forged, an unbreakable bond between two women who were about to change the rules of the game. The king had been checked, and the queen was about to make her move. The 24-hour deadline passed in a haze of tense anticipation. Cole, confident in his victory, had left the house early, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. He had expected to return to a signed confession, a broken woman, and a problem solved. He had not expected to find a queen in his castle, a formidable opponent who had just rewritten the rules of engagement. Ava Whittaker, armed with a newfound sense of courage and the solid weight of the master keys in her pocket, had spent the day preparing for battle. She had called a lawyer, a woman recommended by Evelyn, who had listened to her story with a mixture of outrage and professional calm. The prenuptial agreement, she had explained, was not as ironclad as Cole had led her to believe. His actions, his cruelty, his attempt to coerce her into an abortion had all been meticulously documented by Evelyn, a secret arsenal of evidence that was about to be deployed. When Cole returned that evening, he found Ava waiting for him in the living room, a space that had once been the stage for their carefully curated performance of a happy marriage. She was not the weeping, defeated woman he had expected. She was calm, composed, and radiating a quiet strength that he had never seen before. Evelyn was sitting in a nearby armchair, a silent, watchful presence, her knitting needles clicking softly in the otherwise silent room. "Did you sign the papers?" he asked, his voice sharp and impatient, his eyes darting from Ava to his mother, a flicker of unease in their depths. "No," Ava Whittaker said, her voice clear and steady. "I did not," a flash of anger in his eyes, the first crack in his confident facade. "I gave you an ultimatum, Ava. You had 24 hours. The deal is off the table." "There was never a deal, Cole," she replied, her voice as cold as his own. "There was only a threat, and I do not respond to threats." He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're in no position to make demands. You're in my house, living off my money. I can have you thrown out on the street with a single phone call." "No, you can't," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. She put down her knitting, her gaze fixed on her son, her expression a mixture of disappointment and steely resolve. "This house, Cole, is not yours to do with as you please. It is held in a family trust, a trust that I control. And as the mother of your unborn child, Ava has every right to live here." The color drained from Cole's face, his bravado crumbling in the face of his mother's quiet authority. He had always seen her as a gentle, passive figure in his life, a woman to be managed and placated. He had never seen this side of her, this fierce, protective matriarch who held the purse strings and the power in the Whittaker family. "This is between me and my wife," he snarled, his voice a low, desperate growl. "No," Evelyn replied, her voice unwavering. "It is between you and your family, and you have betrayed that family. You have betrayed your wife, your child, and the values that this family was built on." She stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate, and walked towards Ava. She placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was a clear and unambiguous declaration of her allegiance. "Ava is staying here, Cole, with me. And if you try to harm her or the child in any way, you will have to answer to me." The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air between them, more potent than any angry words. Cole stared at his mother, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly defeated. The king had been checkmated, and he had not even seen it coming. He turned to Ava, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You will regret this," he hissed, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "Both of you." He turned and stormed out of the house, the sound of the front door slamming shut echoing in the cavernous room. The silence that followed was not the oppressive, menacing silence of before. It was a new kind of silence, a silence filled with the promise of a new beginning. Ava Whittaker looked at Evelyn, her heart filled with a gratitude so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Evelyn smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed her face, erasing the lines of worry and concern. "We women have to stick together," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "Now let's get you something to eat. You're eating for two now." As they walked towards the kitchen, a sense of peace settled over Ava, a feeling of safety and security that she had not known since she had first entered the gilded cage. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a warrior, and she had a powerful ally by her side. The gilded cage was no longer a prison. It was a fortress, and within its walls a new family was being forged, a family built not on power and control, but on love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of motherhood. The days that followed the confrontation were a strange and surreal new reality. The mansion, once a place of suffocating silence and unspoken tension, was now a sanctuary, a fortress against the storm that raged outside its walls. Cole had disappeared, his presence in the house replaced by a void that was both a relief and a source of a new, more subtle anxiety. He had not returned, had not called, had not made any attempt to contact either Ava or his mother. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a palpable sense of unease. Ava Whittaker and Evelyn moved through the house in a state of quiet solidarity, two women bound together by a shared enemy and a common cause. The master keys, a symbol of their newfound power, were a constant, reassuring weight in Ava's pocket. She had reclaimed her studio, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil once again filling the air, a familiar and comforting aroma that was the scent of her own identity, her own freedom. She painted with a feverish intensity, pouring all the turmoil and emotion of the past few weeks onto the canvas, her art a form of therapy, a way of processing the trauma and reclaiming her voice. Evelyn, for her part, had taken on the role of a gentle, watchful guardian. She made sure that Ava was eating well, that she was getting enough rest, that she was not dwelling on the past. She would bring her tea and sandwiches in the studio, her presence a quiet, unobtrusive comfort. They would spend the evenings together in the living room, reading or talking, the sound of their voices a soft, melodic counterpoint to the silence of the house. But beneath the surface of their peaceful coexistence, a current of uncertainty ran deep. Cole's silence was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it was a reprieve, a much-needed respite from his toxic presence. On the other, it was a source of a gnawing anxiety. What was he planning? What new form of cruelty was he devising in the shadows? The man she had married was a master of manipulation, a brilliant strategist who would not accept defeat easily. His silence was not a surrender. It was a regrouping, a gathering of forces for the next attack. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Naomi Pierce, had been in regular contact, her voice a reassuring presence on the other end of the phone. She had filed for a restraining order, a legal barrier to protect Ava from any further harassment. She was also preparing for the divorce proceedings, a long and arduous process that would be made all the more difficult by Cole's wealth and influence. "He will fight dirty," she had warned Ava. "He will try to paint you as an unfit mother, a gold digger, a liar. We need to be prepared for anything." The thought of a long, drawn-out custody battle filled Ava with a sense of dread. She would have to face him in court, to relive the trauma of their marriage, to have her character and her motives scrutinized and dissected by a team of ruthless lawyers. But the fear was tempered by a new, steely resolve. She would not let him win. She would fight for her child, for her freedom, for the future that she was determined to build for herself. One evening, as she and Evelyn were sitting in the living room, a car pulled up in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Ava's heart leapt into her throat, a familiar jolt of fear. Was it him? Had he come back to reclaim his kingdom, to wage his war? Evelyn put a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's all right, dear. I'm here." A man in a dark suit got out of the car and walked to the front door. He was not Cole. He was a courier, and he was holding a large, official-looking envelope. Evelyn answered the door and signed for the package, her face a mask of calm composure. She brought the envelope into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. It was addressed to Ava. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her mind racing with 1,000 different possibilities. Was it from Cole? A new threat? A new ultimatum? Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, a legal document from Cole's lawyers. It was a formal offer of a settlement, a new and improved version of the one he had presented to her in his study. This one was far more generous, a multi-million-dollar sum that would set her up for life. But the condition was the same. She had to terminate the pregnancy. The cold, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had not given up. He had simply changed his tactics. He was trying to buy her off, to put a price on the life of their child. The offer was a test, a temptation, a final, desperate attempt to control her. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes filled with a mixture of disgust and a new, unshakable resolve. "He thinks he can buy me," she said, her voice a low, angry whisper. "He thinks he can buy my child." Evelyn's eyes hardened, a flash of the same fierce, protective anger that Ava had seen before. "He is a fool," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "He has always been a fool." Ava Whittaker took the letter and tore it in half, then in half again, the sound of the ripping paper a satisfying declaration of her defiance. She would not be bought. She would not be broken. She would not be silenced. The aftermath of the confrontation was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was the start of a new chapter in her life, a chapter that she would write on her own terms. The gilded cage had been broken, and the bird was learning to fly. The storm was still raging, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her wings, and she was ready to soar. The torn pieces of Cole's offer lay on the coffee table like fallen leaves, a testament to Ava's defiance. The act of ripping the letter had been a catharsis, a physical manifestation of her refusal to be bought or intimidated. But as the initial rush of adrenaline subsided, a new wave of questions washed over her. Why was Cole so desperate to avoid fatherhood? What was the source of his cold, calculating cruelty? And what was the full story behind the family trust that Evelyn had used as a shield to protect her? The answers came a few days later, on a quiet, sun-drenched afternoon. Evelyn found Ava in the garden, sketching the intricate patterns of a rose petal in her notebook. She sat down beside her on the stone bench, a rare, pensive expression on her face. "There are things you need to know, Ava," she began, her voice soft but firm. "Things about Cole, about this family, that will help you understand what you are up against." She told her a story that was a world away from the polished, perfect image that the Whittaker family presented to the world. It was a story of a lonely, insecure boy who had grown up in the shadow of a powerful, demanding father. Cole's father, a man who had built the family fortune from nothing, had been a ruthless, unforgiving patriarch who had valued success above all else. He had pushed Cole relentlessly, instilling in him a deep-seated fear of failure and a desperate need for control. He was never allowed to be a child, Evelyn said, her voice filled with a mother's sorrow. He was always expected to be a man, to be the best, to be perfect, and any sign of weakness, of vulnerability, was met with scorn and ridicule. The gilded cage, Ava Whittaker realized, had been built long before she had ever entered it. Cole was as much a prisoner of his past as she had been of his present. His cruelty, his need for control, were not signs of strength, but of a profound and deeply rooted weakness. Evelyn then explained the intricacies of the family trust, a legal fortress that had been designed by Cole's grandfather to protect the family's wealth and legacy from the whims of any single individual. The house, the stocks, the vast majority of the Whittaker fortune were all held in the trust, and as the matriarch of the family, Evelyn was the sole trustee. Cole, for all his bluster and bravado, was little more than a well-paid employee of his own family, his lavish lifestyle dependent on his mother's approval. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Evelyn explained that there was a clause in the trust, a stipulation that had been added by Cole's grandfather, a man who had valued family above all else. The clause stated that any direct heir of the Whittaker bloodline would automatically become a beneficiary of the trust upon their birth, with a significant portion of the assets transferred to their name. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a chilling and undeniable picture. Cole's desperation to terminate the pregnancy was not just about his fear of fatherhood. It was about money. It was about power. The birth of his child would mean a significant loss of his own personal wealth, a dilution of his control over the family fortune. He was not just trying to erase a child, he was trying to protect his inheritance. The revelation was a sickening blow, a new and more profound level of betrayal. He had not just lied to her, he had used her. His love a calculated deception, his marriage a means to an end. She was a pawn in a game of power and greed, her child a threat to his financial security. "I am so sorry, Ava," Evelyn said, her voice choked with emotion. "I should have told you sooner. I should have protected you from him." Ava Whittaker looked at the older woman, her heart filled with a mixture of pity and a new, deeper understanding. Evelyn was not just her ally. She was a fellow victim of Cole's ambition, a mother who had watched her son become a monster. "It's not your fault," Ava said, her voice gentle. "You are protecting me now, and that is all that matters." In the days that followed, the whispers of the past became the weapons of the future. Armed with the knowledge of the trust and the evidence of Cole's coercion, Ava's lawyer, Naomi Pierce, drew up a new set of divorce papers, a counteroffer that was a masterclass in legal strategy. It was not a request for a settlement. It was a demand for what was rightfully hers, and her child's. It laid out, in cold, hard detail, Cole's attempts to manipulate and control her, his financial motives for wanting to terminate the pregnancy, and the legal ramifications of his actions. The papers were sent to Cole's lawyers, a declaration of war that was met with a deafening silence. The king had been backed into a corner, his weapons rendered useless, his kingdom on the verge of collapse. The whispers of the past had become a roar, and the will of a long-dead patriarch was about to change the course of the future. The gilded cage was no longer a prison, it was a courtroom, and the verdict was already in. The silence from Cole's camp was a new kind of psychological warfare. It was a waiting game, a test of nerves, and Ava Whittaker found herself caught in a limbo of uncertainty. The initial sense of empowerment that had come with the knowledge of the trust and the filing of the countersuit had begun to fade, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The slow thaw of her fear was a gradual process, a day-by-day, hour-by-hour struggle to reclaim her sense of self, to believe in a future that was not defined by Cole's shadow. She threw herself into her art, her studio becoming a sanctuary of creation and a refuge from the storm of her emotions. She painted with a raw, visceral honesty, her canvases a riot of color and emotion, a visual diary of her journey from despair to defiance. The act of creation was a form of healing, a way of transmuting her pain into something beautiful, something powerful, something that was entirely her own. Evelyn, a constant, reassuring presence, encouraged her to reconnect with the world outside the mansion's walls. She arranged for Eva to meet with a gallery owner, a friend of hers who was known for her discerning eye and her support of emerging artists. The meeting was a turning point for Eva, a validation of her talent that was a world away from Cole's dismissive tolerance. The gallery owner was captivated by her work, by the raw emotion and the bold, unapologetic use of color. She offered Eva a solo exhibition, a chance to share her story with the world, to reclaim her narrative on her own terms. The news was a ray of sunshine in the long, cold winter of her uncertainty. It was a tangible goal, a focus for her creative energy, a reason to look forward to a future that was not defined by the divorce proceedings. She began to prepare for the exhibition with a renewed sense of purpose, her days filled with the familiar and comforting rhythm of her work. The slow thaw was not just happening within Eva, it was also happening in the world outside. Cole, stripped of his power and his control, was a man adrift. He had been forced to move out of the penthouse, his access to the family funds severely restricted by Evelyn. He was living in a small, sterile apartment, a stark reminder of his fall from grace. He had lost not just his wife and his home, but also the respect of his colleagues and the fear of his rivals. The whispers of his personal life had become a roar in the business world, his reputation in tatters. He began to reach out, not to Eva, but to Evelyn, his calls a mixture of desperate pleading and angry accusations. He was a man drowning in self-pity, unable to comprehend how his carefully constructed world had crumbled around him. Evelyn listened with a mother's patience, her responses calm and measured, but her resolve unwavering. She would not be manipulated, would not be swayed by his empty promises and his false remorse. One afternoon, a package arrived for Eva. It was not from a lawyer, not from a courier, but from a local bookstore. Inside was a single book, a collection of poems by Rilke, the same book that Cole had given her on their first date. There was no note, no explanation, just the book, a silent, ambiguous message from a man she no longer knew. The gesture was a crack in the ice of her anger, a flicker of the man she had once loved, the man who had wooed her with poetry and promises. Was it a genuine expression of remorse, a desperate attempt to win her back, or just another calculated move in his long game of manipulation? She did not know, and she did not care to find out. The slow thaw was not about forgiveness. It was about healing. It was about letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment that had been her constant companions for so long. It was about making peace with the past, not for his sake, but for her own, and for the sake of the child that was growing inside her. The exhibition was a triumph. The gallery was filled with people, their faces a sea of admiration and curiosity. Eva Whittaker, standing in the midst of her creations, felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that was more satisfying than any of Cole's extravagant gifts. She had taken her pain and turned it into art, her story a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As she was talking to a group of admirers, she saw a familiar figure lingering at the edge of the crowd. It was Cole. He looked older, tired, his once confident swagger replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He did not approach her, did not try to speak to her. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on her, a look of profound and undeniable regret on his face. Their eyes met for a brief, fleeting moment, a silent exchange of 1,000 unspoken words. And in that moment, Eva Whittaker knew that the slow thaw was complete. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, compassionate sadness for the man he had become, for the love they had lost. The gilded cage was a distant memory, a chapter in a book that was now closed. She was free, and she was ready to begin her new life, a life filled with art, with love, and with the promise of a future that was brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. The months that followed the exhibition were a time of quiet growth and profound transformation. The divorce was finalized, a clean, swift severing of the ties that had bound her to a life of gilded misery. Cole, humbled and defeated, had not contested the terms of the settlement. Ava Whittaker was granted full custody of their child and a generous financial settlement that would ensure their security for years to come. The house on Starling Crest, the symbol of her confinement and her liberation, was now officially hers, a sanctuary for the new life she was building. Her daughter, Hazel, was born on a crisp autumn morning, a tiny, perfect creature with her mother's eyes, and a spirit that was all her own. Holding her for the first time, Ava felt a love so fierce and so overwhelming that it brought tears to her eyes. This was the reason for her fight, the purpose of her struggle, the beautiful, miraculous culmination of her journey from darkness to light. Evelyn, a doting grandmother, was a constant, loving presence in their lives. The three of them formed a new kind of family, a matriarchal trinity built on a foundation of love, loyalty, and mutual respect. The mansion, once a place of oppressive silence, was now filled with the sound of laughter, of lullabies, of the joyful, gurgling coos of a baby. Cole, for his part, had disappeared from their lives. He had left the city, moved to a small, quiet town on the coast, a self-imposed exile from the world he had once ruled. He sent a gift for Hazel, a small silver locket with a single, perfect pearl, a silent acknowledgement of the daughter he would never know. Ava Whittaker accepted the gift, a gesture of peace, a final, quiet closing of a painful chapter. Years passed, and the echoes of the past began to fade. Ava Whittaker's career as an artist flourished, her work celebrated for its emotional depth and its raw, honest beauty. Hazel grew into a bright, curious, and compassionate young girl, her childhood a world away from the cold, loveless environment of her father's youth. One day, a letter arrived, postmarked from the small coastal town where Cole had made his new life. It was a thick, heavy envelope, and Ava Whittaker's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar, elegant script of his handwriting. She opened it with a sense of trepidation, her mind a whirlwind of old, half-forgotten emotions. The letter was not a plea for forgiveness, not a demand for a second chance. It was a confession, a long, rambling, and painfully honest account of his life, his fears, his regrets. He wrote of his lonely childhood, of his desperate need for his father's approval, of the toxic ambition that had poisoned his soul. He wrote of his love for her, a love that he had been too afraid, too weak to honor. And he wrote of his daughter, the child he had tried to erase, the living, breathing symbol of his greatest failure. "I do not ask for your forgiveness, Ava," he wrote. "I do not deserve it. I only ask that you tell our daughter that her father was not a monster, but a weak and foolish man who lost his way, and that he loved her in his own broken, inadequate way from afar." Tears streamed down Ava Whittaker's face as she read the letter. Tears not of anger, but of a deep, compassionate sadness. It was the letter she had been waiting for, the one she had never expected to receive. It was not a redemption, but an echo of one, a faint, flickering glimmer of the man he might have been. She did not reply to the letter. There was nothing left to say. The story was over. The wounds had healed, the scars had faded. She had found her own redemption, not in forgiveness, but in the life she had built, the love she had nurtured, the art she had created. That evening, as she was tucking Hazel into bed, Her daughter looked up at her with a child's innocent curiosity. "Mommy," she asked, "do I have a daddy?" Ava Whittaker smiled, a gentle, loving smile. "Yes, my love," she said, her voice soft and clear. "You do. And one day, when you are older, I will tell you all about him." She would tell her the truth, not the whole, brutal truth, but a gentler, more compassionate version of it. She would tell her of a man who had been lost, and who, in the end, had found a small, quiet piece of his soul. She would tell her a story not of a monster, but of a man. A story not of betrayal, but of a love that had been strong enough to survive it. A story of a gilded cage, and the two women, and the child who had learned to fly.